So what I'd like to talk about today is an art-science collaboration project that me and 4 of my friends have been working on for the last 2 years or so. And the idea for this project has been to combine our strengths in both scientific fields and as well as artistic ones. So who are we, first of all? Before that, let's talk briefly about what I'm going to go into. First of all, I'll tell you who we are, what we do, and then we'll go through 3 case studies of pieces that we've made during the last year or so. And finally, we may have a demo which may or may not work, and you're free to ask questions as well. Also, if you have questions during the presentation, please just raise your hand and I'll try to see in this glare and let you have your say as well. So first of all, who are we? We're 5 university students. We're doing our master's and PhD degrees right now. The 3 of us in the background there are basically founded the project first. We are childhood friends, and after we met, or after we sort of went on to university, we went on our separate paths. And later on, when we met, we started talking about having some sort of interaction between the fields in which we work. So from the left there, we have Kasperi Mäkirennikka, who is studying media arts and art education at the Aalto University. In the center, we have Jari Torniainen, who's also here with us today, who's studying electrical engineering at Aalto University. Then in the lower left corner, we have Henri Kotkanen, and in the lower right, Jukka Toivonen, who are both originally cognitive scientists. Jukka Toivonen has since moved on into computer science. And then there's me, and I'm also a cognitive scientist, although these days I'm working on basic animal neuroscience. So as you can see, we have a sort of very varied background in both sciences and art. And this, I think, is the sort of strength we've brought to both the fields, or both the fields of art and different fields of science as well. So what do? We work in many different fields. Mainly for the last year, we've been working in bringing methods from neuroscience into an artistic form, into an artistic expression. And during this time, we've made electronics, we've done programming, we do basically everything we can towards each different project. Of course, where we can, we try to use ready products, and I'll tell you more about those. But often in the project that we've done so far, there are sort of holes in the project which cannot be filled with products that are currently on the market. So we need to sort of expand what's available. And in the background there, you see a recently acid-etched printed circuit board, which was a sort of prototype for the suit project that I'll talk to you about a little later. So first, we'll talk about what was basically our first or second project called It's Not Just in Your Head. And this is what it looked like. We had it in a gallery for about 2 weeks, I guess. And the viewer, I mean, there were other pieces in the gallery as well, but the viewer comes to this podium and sees this. They see a single podium at the front with some instructions and some strange devices. And there are 3 podia at the back, which contain small plastic pellets, BB balls basically, in a sort of chamber that's limited by that glass jar thing. So what are we doing here? We bought a few sort of consumer-grade EEG devices. These were talked about briefly in the previous presentation. So these are the emotive epochs that the previous presenter mentioned. They're sort of $300 consumer devices. Not very good in many respects, but they're the sort of best that you can get as a consumer unless you start really building your own stuff. The research grade stuff that you can, or the devices that you use in research are typically a lot more expensive, in the range of tens of thousands of euros, for instance. So what we have here is a device where each of the small round things, the boules, is a sensor. And these are placed onto your skull, like this. and they record electrical activity from your scalp. And that electrical activity reflects what's happening in your brain, roughly. There are a lot of other things that it reflects as well, but that's sort of the reason why EEG is used is to monitor the brain and what's happening in the brain in more or less in real time. So, what are the challenges in using a device like this? Well, first of all, EEG signals are very, very hard to detect. They are, if you will, whispers on the scalp compared to the shouts or screams that you get when, say, you clench your jaw or simply move your head. So what we get is a set of signals that are very, very noisy. And this is sort of the main problem with using EEG for anything, basically. It's the main reason why we don't have brain-computer interfaces currently, or at least not anything that's non-invasive. So, what sort of hardware and software are we using? We are using an EEG device, like this one. Any other EEG device would do, of course. Particularly one with less noise would be preferable. Then we need a 3-channel sound card. Each channel corresponds to one of the podia that you saw in the image a few slides back. And each of those podia contains a subwoofer element. That's basically a speaker element that's meant for low frequencies. So you get those in sort of home cinema setups, for instance. We ripped apart a few of them, and then we just took the speaker element and attached it to the top cover of the podium. So there's a small hole, and then the speakers attached directly onto that hole, and the BB balls are in a sort of cup formed by the speaker cone. That's basically all the hardware you'll need. In addition to this, of course, you'll need a computer, but most people have these, so that's not a problem. In addition, you need software for EEG acquisition. Now, the company that makes these sells the consumer version for about $300. But they've chosen to encrypt the signals that are produced by this device. Fortunately, there are open source software projects that have managed to sort of solve this problem, and you can get the raw signal from the device using those softwares. Okay, so now you have an EEG signal, and as I said, it's a very noisy, it's a difficult signal to work with because there are no clear features that represent brain activity there. You have a lot of static noise of some sort, and there's a minuscule signal that's sort of embedded into that static. So first of all, we needed some way of simply detecting whether or not the device is on the head or not, because the noise will be there regardless of whether or not anyone's using it. And obviously, we don't want the piece to sort of react to nothing, or have it react to the fact that somebody's just sort of holding it there. And I'll show you what I mean by react in a few seconds. We have a video of what this looked like. So, assuming we solve the head detection problems, i.e. the problem that somebody is trying to use the device, we then take the signal and we do what's called a frequency decomposition. Is this something that's sort of relevant, or is this something that you've ever come across? I mean, Fourier Analysis is the other word for what's happening here, but all right, so no one's heard of that. Fourier Analysis is a bit difficult. It's too difficult for me to explain right here, but the idea is basically that you take a signal, a sound signal, an EEG signal, whatever signal basically, in time or in space, if you will, and instead of looking at it in terms of how it changes in time, say, for instance, my voice, the sound signal that I'm producing right now is a signal that's obviously changing in time. I'm saying one word now, another word slightly later, and so forth. But there's also another way to look at the signal, and that's through frequency decomposition. And the idea there is that instead of looking at things that happen sequentially in time, you look at how different frequency components work. And different frequency components are what you can sort of imagine when you compare how other people speak. The tone or the pitch of their voice, that's a different frequency. It has the similar temporal structure, but it has a different frequency structure. Or say you're playing a piano and you can play a tune at the sort of left end, which is very low, and you can play the tune more or less on the right end, which is very high. So the temporal structure is similar, but the frequency structure is different. And this is, we're sort of looking at the frequency structure here. And then finally, we have sound synthesis, which is fed to the subwoofer elements I spoke of earlier. So this is what it looks like in, or looked like in. So here you can see one of the podia. The subwoofer element is sort of there, the black round thing at the bottom, and you have the BB balls on the element. So you come to the stand. There's a device like this on the podium on your front. Actually, when this was recorded, it was on someone's head, but in any case, there's a device like this there. You put it onto your head, like we have here a nice volunteer, and we take the Eeg signal. We first of all detect whether or not it's on your head, and then we take the Eeg signal and we break it into 3 parts. And we feed those 3 parts to these 3 podia so that they react to what's happening in your brain, more or less in real time. There's some lag due to the processing, but you know, it's reasonable. So nothing's happening when you come there. You put it on your head. We wait a few seconds, and suddenly this happens. You start seeing motion. You start seeing, you hear the subwoofer elements because they're fairly loud. And you're sort of, perhaps for the first time, you have a personal experience of what neuroscience might mean. Because as it is, neuroscience is somewhat sort of distant from the lives of most people. Unless you're a researcher, you don't really get to experience neuroscience in any relevant context. All right, so that was basically what we were working on first. So the next project that I'll mention is the suit, and that's related to the PCB, the printed circuit board that you saw a few slides back. So here we have another the same volunteer in this case, and he's wearing a suit, and you'll see that there's something strange attached to the inner lining of the suit. And that is a GVS device. So what is GVS? GVS stands for galvanic vestibular stimulation. So in your inner ear, in this area of the skull, you have an organ that looks more or less like the drawing down there. And that organ, among other things, is responsible for your sense of balance. So there are 3 sort of orthogonal fluid-filled chambers there. And as you move, the fluid sort of sloshes about because it doesn't react instantly. And the sloshing of the fluid activates hairs that are connected to neurons lining these tubes. And that sloshing is sort of interpreted by your brain as a sort of postural or balance-related sense, a vestibular sense. So now the question is, what happens if we stimulate these neurons directly without sort of involving the fluid in any way? And that means, I mean, if we can stimulate them directly, that means we can also stimulate them artificially. So you don't actually need to move the person in order to stimulate the vestibular system. So what happens in that case? Well, what turns out happens is that the person has a sensation of motion or of losing their balance while nothing sort of apparent is happening to them. So what we did, obviously, is we took some hardware again. So what you need is a current source. That's basically just an electronic component that lets you pass electronic current through to electrodes. You need the electrodes, and you attach them near the sort of scalp where the inner ear is, so sort of slightly behind the ear. Then you need a microcontroller, just because typically the current source is such that you can't connect it directly to a computer, and that wouldn't be safe anyway. And of course, for stylistic reasons, you need a suit. And then you need some way of controlling the current. So this is a software part. And then for this instance, and you'll see it in just a few seconds again, we used stock data to sort of to work as a sort of control signal. So you need some way of getting stock data because stock data isn't really readily available unless you're paying a very large sum of money. But you can get stock data, you can get stock graphs, and you can sort of extract the stock courses that way. So that's your control signal. So now this is a piece that we're working on all throughout the summer. We're recording one of these videos per week, and they're being shown at the art festival in Manta, which takes the whole summer. So what we have here, and I'll sort of, actually I'll put it into the background so you can sort of watch. We take 1 week's worth of stock data from the index that sort of reflects what's happening in the Helsinki Stock Exchange, the OMX Helsinki 25 stock. And we partition that stock data into a number of pieces, and we determine whether or not the stocks are going up or down during each piece. So you can imagine that at 10 o'clock on Monday the stocks were going up, then at say 12 o'clock on Monday they were going down, and so forth. And this is what we feed as a control signal to the electrodes. And the result is what you can see here. Actually, I can put that on full screen for a while. So the white line on the left is the stock data it's tracing out the whole week, previous week. And the performer standing right in the center has electrodes implanted and the GVS device implanted there. And they're being stimulated in tandem with the stock course changes. So when the stocks go up, he'll sway to the left because he feels he's losing balance to the other side. And when the stocks go up, he'll sway to the other side. I mean, of course, we could take any sort of data, any sort of temporal data anyway, and use it in a similar fashion. But stock markets are sort of interesting in the fact that they sort of affect our lives, but they're not readily visible, or the effects are. And so this is a way to sort of make the effect very visible by forcing someone to fall over when stocks change. All right. This is a 10-minute video, so if you're interested, you're more than welcome to look at. These are all available online, obviously. So now that we've looked at two, we'll look at the sort of titular piece here, which is Brainpoetry, which was perhaps our most ambitious project so far. So what you see here is a receipt printout with a poem. And this is basically what you go out with once you've come and tried out this particular piece. Unfortunately, today, I mean, you'll be able to try this today, but unfortunately we had technical difficulties beyond just the stuff that you saw in the beginning, and our receipt printer is not working, so you won't get a receipt, but you'll get the experience sans that. So what's behind this? Jukka Toivonen, who's not here with us today, is working on his PhD project in computational creativity. And computational creativity is basically the idea that you program computers to perform creative tasks. So in this instance, Jukka has been working on programming a computer, or creating a computer program that's able to compose poetry, more or less in real time. This is a schematic from one of his articles. And basically it sort of shows the flow of control in the algorithm. So we start out from the left. We give the program some sort of parameters. In this case, we have the parameters, or we sort of parameterize the Eeg signal and use that as a parameter. But you could do it sort of manually as well. And you give parameters. What sort of poem do you want? Do you want a certain sort of rhythm? Do you want a certain sort of theme? Or do you want a certain sort of, say, poetic form? say a rhyming structure or something like that. And that's sort of given as a sort of argument to the program. So let's say you tell the program you want a 5-line iambic pentameter poem. And that's what the algorithm will try to do. So at that point, you get to the Explorer component right there at the right. And you've given this parameter or this sort of description of what you want. And the program then takes that description as well as a model of poetry that is generated based on very large sets of textual data. So what we've done is we've fed the algorithm loads of ready-made poetry, I mean human-made poetry. And what the algorithm then does is it sort of takes all of that data and sort of compresses it down and tries to find structure in that. And then once it's found structure in that, it takes that data and the parameters that you've given it to form a new poem, a poem that sort of retains the sort of linguistic patterns that you get in real poetry or real human poetry, but which is sort of randomized and, more importantly, sort of follows the parameters that you've given it. So what you get as a result is a basically infinite number of new computer-generated poems that resemble but aren't exactly equivalent to the stuff that you fed it and which are sort of affected by the parameters you give it on each run. So obviously, we still have this EEG device and we paid a lot of money for it, so we'll use that as a sort of parameter. We detect something called an alpha spike, and that's a feature in EEG that's sort of relatively easy to detect on most people. It's something that varies individually, so one person may have a certain type, actually a frequency sort of location for the alpha spike, and another person will have a slightly different one. So the set of different types of alpha spike that you can get are sort of parameterized. You get a number, say, of 10 different types of alpha spike, and then we tie each of those types to a set of parameters for the poetry generation. So let's say a person with an alpha spike, a very low frequency alpha spike, will get a 5-line poem which is composed mainly of, say, biblical texts which rhyme at the end of each stanza. And then once we have the alpha spike and the category, we give that to the algorithm, and the result is a new poem of in that style, which is sort of personalized for the person who has the EEG device on their head. Here too we need an EEG device, a microcontroller to control the thermal printer, a thermal printer so that you get something to take with you as you go. And then we need similar types of EEG analysis software, as I mentioned before, as well as obviously the poetry generation algorithms that Jukka's been working on for his PhD project. So now I would very much like to let you try generating a poem of your own. Before we go on to that, and because it'll take a little while for me to get it started here, I would very much prefer to have some questions if you have any. No. Yes, at the back. Yeah, please.
So basically you turn the EEG into a random number generator, or is there something more sophisticated going on?
In which project? I mean, in
generating the poem.
Ah, yes. So there we classify EEG into one of 10 categories, and these aren't sort of random categories. They do sort of, I mean, you'll get a similar result if you try again and again. So you'll get the same category more or less each time, subject to some noise issues. Once you have that number, that sort of defines what sort of poetry you'll get. So every time you try again, you'll get a similar type of poetry, say something that has biblical lines, for instance. You'll get a different poem every time because you'll get a different random seed, which is sort of generated by the computer, but you'll get the same style of poetry each time. And that's sort of how the EG affects the end result.
Yeah, thanks.
Was there another question back there somewhere? Yeah.
How did you decide what kind of poetry to give, what kind of brainwaves? Like, how did you decide that, okay, this kind of thing, okay, this has to be like biblical poems? And
That's a very good question, particularly because that's basically what everyone asks once they try it. Everyone wants to know why I particularly get, this style of poem. So our choice of texts, as well as our choice of EG parameters, are somewhat opportunistic. It's difficult to get large whole data sets of text which are sort of properly formatted for the algorithm. So what we did is we basically got free text from Project Gutenberg. The Bible is obviously in most translations freely available online. We got some amateur poetry which was available online. So those are sort of the thematic categories that we gave the algorithm. As for why we chose the alpha spike, the problem with that headset, besides some mechanical difficulties, those tend to break a lot, is that the amount of noise in the signal is very large. And that means that you need a very, very robust signal in order to get anything that's not completely random. And an alpha spike is something that most people will exhibit and which we can detect in about the 5 to 10 seconds that we have per person who comes there. So, I mean, if you do proper EEG research, what you tend to do is you take a participant and then you prep them for 30 to 60 minutes before you start recording anything. So you put a sort of very large EEG cap on their head, and you prepare each electrode separately, and you clean the skin, and you do all sorts of stuff. When you're in a gallery setting or in a setting like this, people expect to come to the device, have it on their head, and have a result in, say, 30 seconds. So, I mean, the quality of signal we get is proportional to the amount of preparation we do. So with little preparation, we have a poor quality signal, and that means that we're sort of limited in what we can try to detect in the signal, and that's why we get chosen alpha spike location as the parameter. You were also asking about why certain people have certain types of responses. I mean, even if you had research-grade equipment, no one can currently say, determine what style of poetry you like from an EEG or any brain signal, basically. Yeah, you could maybe you could do something like try to determine what a person's reaction to a certain style of poetry is, and then you'd have to show them lots of examples of a certain type of poetry. But de novo, I mean, if you just come here and I put the device on your head, any device currently available, I cannot detect what style of poetry you like. So the connection between the alpha spike location and the category selected is to some degree arbitrary, but it does hold true every time, more or less every time you go there. So you have a consistent sort of choice there. Yeah.
A bit more technical question.
Sure.
What area of frequency interferes with the signal, can you say? Or more specifically, what kind of devices would harm the results typically?
In a research setting, what you're typically worried about is, first of all, line noise, which is basically caused by the 50 hertz electrical signal that we have all around us. So what you do is you build a huge room and you isolate it from everything and do stuff like that. But more importantly, I think, is the fact that I mean, if you simply move the device on your head a little, and you'll see it in the demo later on if we get it to work, is simply moving the device on your head will cause a lot of a broad spectrum noise. The same happens if you clench your jaws or some muscles fairly close. You get a very broad spectrum noise that sort of permeates the signal. In addition to that, the sensors themselves are noisy, so you get sort of, what is it called, popping noise, I guess, would be the term there. You can also polarize the electrodes, so you can get sort of those sort of problems. I mean, there's an entire literature of EEG noise, which makes it very difficult. Yes?
So to conclude, in addition to outside noise sources, the brain itself causes noise to this?
Everything around the brain certainly does cause noise. Whether or not the brain itself causes noise is something of an issue that's being debated a lot. The Eeg signal sort of reflects activity in a very large portion of the brain. A single electrode will record responses that are sort of generated by millions, hundreds of millions of neurons. So nobody really knows whether or not there's a signal or some sort of informational content in EEG besides the sort of things that we look for. I mean, everybody takes it as noise, but we don't know. Yes, maybe the brain itself causes noise as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Then I'll just take a few minutes and I'll try to set up the Brainpoetry example, and you'll get to put the device on your head, generate a poem for yourself. Unfortunately, we can't provide a receipt this time, but I mean, this particular piece has been on show in several locations, so if you're really interested, you can go to our website, brainsonart.com, and try and follow where we'll be next, and we may very well have the Brainpoetry piece there as well. Beside that, thank you for listening. Also, if Jari wanted to add something, I might have forgotten something, please do. Okay.
Saatko sen ajettua Windowsin puolelta?
Unfortunately, you'll have to come a little bit closer. We are unable to project the sort of results over there, and as well, and this device has to be fairly close to the computer as well. Ah, okei. Okay.
Kohtuullisena tuohon.
Tän voi katsoa.
Sitten video siinä edessä,
joo.
Jos se onnistuu sillä.
Eiköhän. Haetko sä sen vastaanottimen tähän? Haetko sä sen vastaanottimen? Se on siellä laatikossa. Niin, ja jos joku haluaa kysyä kysymyksiä suomeksi, niin ihan rauhassa. Joo, ihan kohta. Kun mä saan sen vaan pyörimään. Niin, tässä nyt kiinni sitä. right. The contrast is a bit poor, but you will see, if you come to the podium here, or the stage here, you'll see the Eeg signal sort of going by in the background. But please, I mean, well, I can demo one time, but it would be more interesting in having you try it out, because I've done this a few times. So what you do is you put the device on your head like this, more or less. You get instructions on screen, but I'll walk you through it this time. So you'll give a name, any name basically, but it'll collect some data. It'll take a few seconds, and the camera is not focusing. And it'll print out your new poem. I'm sorry? Yes, so I mean, we've made it so that we can try, you can generate both poems in both Finnish and English. I chose English in this case, and it seems that like the sort of style of text that was chosen was maybe sort of later medieval English, perhaps. So I'll try to read this, but...
It's actually visible now.
Ah, okay, great. So unless you can, or if you can't read that, what it says is, we balanced to the Parker Morley that sprints the Grinsfelder bent. The lightest lock was in its anniversary, the protagonist in its ignoramus. The recreating protagonists were transcendental, asleep. The cruises were celebrated to evoke, and the protagonist of the instructional, the season of Rousseau Dome. And as you can see, they're very often quite sort of nonsensical, because it's taking parts, you know, from a very large structure of text, and it's sort of, I mean, it has only a primitive sense of the structure there. So the result is somewhat random. Sitten sun pitää tulla vähän tänne lähemmäs, no niin. Sitten saat valita. Okei. Ei tarvitse, se on sulla päässä. Sitten nimimerkki, sillä ei ole mitään merkitystä, se on vaan siinä oikeastaan sitä printtausta varten. Ootas niinku vähän se... No niin, nyt.
Koita olla vähän lähempänä, kun puhuit se suomea vai?
Suomea,
joo. Niin pysy vähän lähempänä, kun tuo äskeinen kamera siinä katkesi signaali sen jälkeen, kun se oli generoinut sen runon, mutta tää on hyvä etäisyys sillä. Jos toi takana oleva laini pysähtyy, niin silloin se on mennyt liian kauas. Joo. No niin, sitten vaan ohjeita, eli enterillä pääset eteenpäin. Onko meillä aikaa miten paljon vielä? Allu. Ei ole aikaa enää vai?
Ei.
Joo, näin vaan mitään.
Mun mentiin yli.
Joo. No, mutta